Why do socialism and crony capitalism always go hand in hand? Look, I was actually going to take the day off today. I wasn't going to write anything and I wasn't going to do a video, but in light of Zohan Mamdani winning the Democratic nomination for mayor in New York, and as such, very likely becoming the next mayor of New York, I thought this issue was worth exploring because there are a bunch of people I think who just they don't understand the concept of crony capitalism, generally speaking, and why it is so closely tied to big government, socialism, and that sort of thing. Crony capitalism is a corrosive, exploitive system, as opposed to free market capitalism, where we have competition and people make better widgets and work to make the world a better place. Now, crony capitalism is when the state and private interests, and they could be corporations, but they can also be unions and whatever, get together to write the rules and regulations to benefit them. Now that could mean, like working through USAID, for instance, okay? Like, basically, ex NGO, a non-government organization, which is hilarious because they're funded by taxpayers, oftentimes, unfortunately. They have a connection with somebody at USAID, and it just happens to be that this NGO wants to do a study on how cocaine makes poodles more randy or something like that. I know that was totally random, but honestly, that is seriously. I think they did something with like cocaine and snails and mating through USAID or something like last year. Anyway, whatever. Okay, that $5 million is not gonna, it's not just going to the study. Okay, it's going to all of the things around the study, the administrators at the NGO, et cetera. Often, the CEOs of these NGOs get paid hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, and that's all money that ultimately comes from the taxpayer. Okay, or you can have giant corporations that lobby in Washington to get, their products on the food stamp list, for instance. I mean, like Coca-Cola, great example, okay? Like the number one thing purchased on food stamps is soda, sugar soda. Well, guess what? Coca-Cola and Pepsi and these PepsiCo, the last thing they want to do is reduce the size of government, because that means that they're, the food stamp program for them, sold as a way to provide for hungry people, means billions and billions and billions of dollars to their bottom line. Okay, so these are just examples, okay? But this is what crony capitalism is, as opposed to free market capitalism, where somebody takes their capital or gathers capital, figures out a gap in the market, solves a problem, makes money, repeat. Okay, that's very different. But the key thing here to understand is that government is the enabling factor in crony capitalism. Okay, our whole lives we have been sold this idea that there's business over here, okay, and then there's government that regulates the business. Okay, it doesn't work that way. In our system, they work together. Okay, the rules and regulations that move through Congress, okay, whether Republican or Democrat, are written by lobbyists, literally written by lobbyists. Okay, I mean, I'm talking about like lobbyists are going into Washington and writing them out. Okay, that happens. That's the system in which we operate. Now, the bigger the government, the bigger the crony capitalism. Okay, the bigger the goodies, the more goodies that government has to hand out. Which, by the way, these goodies are funded by you and me, the taxpayer. Okay, the more goodies the government has to hand out, the more the cronies are going to get in line to make sure they gain access to these goodies. Now, you and I don't get these things because we don't have lobbyists. But these large interests, they could be in government, they could be outside of government, whatever. They know the game, and they're going to get their piece of that pile of taxpayer money one way or another. So that's the crony game. That's the crony system. That's the one in which we operate. Now, it's interesting because across various social media, I talk with folks, and often there are, there's a group of people who really truly believe that, if you could just get the right people in government, then, things would be just and fair and so on. Okay. This, it cannot happen. Okay. Human beings are fallible. We're greedy and selfish. That is just the way it is. Just because you go into government, actually, it's probably worse if you go into government. Greed is always there. Okay. Human beings are going to exploit the system. All right. As much as possible. At least in the private sector, you have the market mechanism, which, if somebody gets too greedy, they go bankrupt. In government, people get greedy and they just, keep taking from the taxpayer. Now, this means that if one wants actual progress, now I'm not talking about progress in the sense of progressivism, I'm talking about human progress, all right? Where people are allowed to be free, the individual gets to actualize their potential to the maximum degree possible. If you want that society, a truly liberal in the classical sense society, you have to reduce the size of government. Okay, people like the Democratic mayoral nominee Zohan Mamdani. Man, I'm gonna have a hard time with that name. They might look like, your friend from college, okay? But inherently, if they're a socialist, I mean, really, like his perspective, no matter how it's packaged, okay, how it's a social justice package, it's like, I'm doing what's good, I'm taking on the big bad guys or whatever, it's fundamentally authoritarian. Like it is a velvet glove over an iron fist. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, no way, he's a perfectly great guy. Look, anybody who wants to expand government, that's their thing. All right. They think that the world would be a better place with more and more and more government, more and more regulations where they're determining how you are going to live. It has been my experience in my 49 years that these folks are usually not very good, and they have ulterior motives that they're not sharing with you. Look, I know it's hard. Like, we all want a better world. But for a better world, we have to reduce the size of government, not expand it. The way we fight crony capitalism, the way we fight corruption, the way we fight this malaise that has infected our country, sadly, for far too long, is to reduce the size of government. Be against crony capitalism. Anyway, like I said, I wasn't planning on doing a video today. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, consider subscribing to the newsletter. I'd appreciate it.